Welcome back. We'd like everybody to take their seats, please. It's time for us to get started for the second half of our program today. And to our live streaming audience, welcome back to you to Philanthropy New York's 40th annual anniversary event. That's what I'm calling it, Rana, whether you want it or not. The next 2 hours, we will be hearing from a number of folks who are exploring different types of tools or structures to have greater impact, will have some diving into the field of promising practices, including shifting and sharing power, working with and supporting government, and embedding racial equity in their grant-making and internal cultures. This is of particular interest to me, as I am the CEO and president of the Ms. Foundation for Women. I'm Teresa Younger. I am also a member of the board of Philanthropy New York and was on the committee that brainstormed today's program and thrilled with it thus far. With the frame, I am pleased to introduce our second Phil Talker for the day, Wes Moore, the CEO of Robin Hood. Last year, Wes and Robin Hood announced their new strategic vision with a focus of lifting households in New York City from poverty to poverty, measurability, and sustainability. Having just done a strategic plan at the Ms. Foundation, when I read his vision, I thought how well aligned it is. It's about speaking truth to power and charging us as philanthropy to do a little more, to take a look at ourselves and not gaze at our belly buttons, mind you, but look at how we're going to change it. He has called on all of us to do several things. Amongst them, to acknowledge that we are not in a pervasive state of pervasive state of poverty because philanthropy or direct service interventions did not do their job. It's broader than us. To supplement the metrics that guide our grant making with a lens towards getting families to the threshold where their chances to fall back into poverty are greatly diminished. To address systems, structures, and the narratives that hold people back. To evaluate the voices of those closest to the problems as we work towards solutions. To acknowledge and come to terms with racism, sexism, homophobia, and prejudice or discrimination in any forms as major contributors to poverty that must be addressed and combated in our work. To support our direct marketing with increased capacities to import and export effective interventions and address policies. To acknowledge our successes and our failures in this process. And what I think is most important, for us all to recognize that a partnership in all the ways is the way we can do that. Knowing that no one individual, initiative, or organization alone can have an effective, meaningful progress towards the problems as complex as poverty, and we need to step into that. So, for our second talker, Phil Talker of the afternoon, please welcome Wes to the stage to share how he will be implementing these words into action. Oh, no, come on now.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you. And to Philanthropy New York, congratulations. Thank you for 40 years of not just work, but 40 years of impact and collaboration, which in the field is not always easy, as I have learned, but just stressing how important it is that we actually do it and we lead with a philosophy of it. I also want to say and acknowledge one of the things that's remarkable for me to be here today is also how unlikely it is that I would be here today. And I say that for a couple reasons. The first of which actually goes back to part of the motivation that we have about how we at Robin Hood have to rethink our work. There's two places that I've ever really called home in my life. One is Baltimore, Maryland, and the other one is about 15 miles away from here up in the Bronx. And I moved up to the Bronx from Baltimore after I was 4 years old and my dad died in front of me. My mother moved to the Bronx to go live with my grandparents, my grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx, my grandmother was a school teacher in the South Bronx. And when I was about 6 years old, that's where we then called home. As we then moved up and I went up to the Bronx, I very quickly found myself getting lost and picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school and which ones weren't. Hurting people that actually did love me so I could impress people that could care less about me. And by the time I was 11 years old was the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists, by 11. I found myself living in a community that was overly and unfairly policed. I found myself living in a community that was chronically, economically neglected, and the worst part about it was that we knew it. And there's a reason that I wanted to actually lead with this chart here. And this is data that comes from the Raj Chetty Group Opportunity Insights. And when you look at the fact that in 1940, about 90% of people then had a chance of having this idea of upward economic mobility. Now we're looking at 1985, and as the trend continues on even past that, we now know that that answer is just about a coin flip. The first job that my mom got that actually gave her benefits was when I was 14 years old. The first job that my mom got that actually gave her the ability to only have one job instead of multiple jobs was when I was 14 years old. The first job that gave her predictable hours was when I was 14 years old. Part of the reason that philanthropy means a great deal to me is that job was with a place called the Annie E. Casey Foundation. She took a job with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I won't forget when she came into the room that myself and my younger sister shared, and she told us about this job that she was starting on Monday. And we had no idea how much at that point that job wasn't just going to change her life, how much it was going to change all of our lives. And also, I still didn't even at that point realize how arbitrary this was. A coin flip. When we think about this probability, this thin line between one life and another life, when we think about what it means to actually create a level of true sustainable mobility for people and know that still at this time we live in a society that is incredibly stingy when it comes to opportunity, and how that just can't be enough. I think about it in context of that second reason why I feel honored but frankly surprised to be here is I remember when Robinhood first contacted me about becoming the CEO of Robinhood, and at first my initial reaction was, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. And when they asked why, I said, well, first of all, I said, I've been pretty critical of philanthropy. And the response of the person who was running the search said, we've done our diligence and we've seen it. But his point was also that, but we don't think that you're incorrect either. That if we're going to be a true organization that focuses on this idea of poverty and poverty fighting, that our job is not to make poverty more tolerable. Our job is not to make poverty easier. It's how exactly can we focus on lifting families out of poverty measurably and sustainably? Because the truth is right now, that is not what we do as a large society. Right now, 42%, and this is just New York, 42% of all New Yorkers have been in poverty at some point over the past 3 years. Almost half. For people who have been lifted out of poverty, over a quarter of them will be back in poverty within the next year. Because a singular shock, a missed train, a child getting sick, and you fall right back in. So part of our responsibility in this is to think about this idea of what are the other levers, because we know that philanthropy is going to be important, but philanthropy, our grants can be catalytic, our grants can be compounded. But as Dr. King said, as is a quote that literally sits on my desk right now, philanthropy is admirable, but the philanthropist cannot forget the economic injustice that makes philanthropy necessary. That we still live in a structure and a system of economic injustice, of an idea that the things that we identify and support and push, that these are concepts, that this is not about dealing with the moments of crisis, but this is about creating the momentum that can break the cycle of poverty for good. That's why we do this work. That's why this work should matter. So that we're not going to be satisfied enough with the success stories or the cute kids that sit in our annual reports. How do we reframe this work with an acknowledgement of the systemic structures that have to then be undone, and the role that philanthropy can play in terms of both taking a lead, coming up with things that government can scale, adding important elements of race and sex and gender into these conversations, and to make ourselves less necessary. There's a power in this idea of 40 years of convening and 40 years of leadership. But if I'm going to be completely frank and completely honest, my prayer for this organization is that 40 years from now that we are less necessary. My prayer is that 40 years from now, we don't need to cover down on all the things we're covering down on now. My prayer is that 40 years from now, many of the issues that we are working on have been solved, because the truth is our job is not to start things, our job is to end things. And coming up with that as a measurement of success. Coming with that as a measurement of accomplishment is our goal. I'm thankful for all you do, and I'm thankful to be a partner in this work with you. And I'm thankful that every single day we can put together programs and initiatives that make ourselves less necessary. Bless you guys, and thank you so much.